Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is traveling to Jordan Tuesday for key talks on building an international alliance against Islamic State militants who control parts of Syria and Iraq. VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns reports on what that instability means for Jordan.
Jordan's looking for help from the United States to prevent Syria's civil war from spilling across the border, with U.S. officials discussing better aerial surveillance and more training for Jordanian Special Operations Forces. Jordanian King Abdullah met with President Obama at the NATO summit in Wales last week to discuss the Syrian war and the rise of Islamic State militants, which have heightened security concerns in Jordan, says U.S. Institute of Peace analyst Steve Heidemann.
The threat level that Jordan confronts has increased, and it is taking measures to tighten its control over borders, to tighten its control over local sympathizers of ISIS.
Security officials say many young militants are inspired by Muslim cleric Abu Qatada, who was extradited from Britain last year. Jordan's postponed his trial on charges of plotting to attack tourists at New Year celebrations in 2000, but previously convicted him for conspiring to attack U.S. targets in Jordan. Heidemann says Jordan's long-standing ties with Europe and the United States make it a more difficult target for Islamic State leaders looking to expand beyond Syria and Iraq.
It is a country which has a far more effective military. It has very close security relationships with the United States. It is seen as, in some respects, although I hate to use this phrase, a red line, which if ISIS were to cross it, might trigger much more extensive U.S. and Western intervention.
Complicating Jordanian security and stretching government resources are hundreds of thousands of refugees from Syria and Iraq, says former U.S. Ambassador Adam Arely.
20% of the population is refugees. That's not a good situation to be in. So I'm worried about Jordan.
Jordanian authorities have so far kept that refugee crisis from undermining internal security. But those strains will only grow worse the longer conflicts in Syria and Iraq continue, says analyst Nora Ben Sahel.
At what point can Jordan, even with the international support it's getting from its partners and from the United Nations, which is very actively involved in trying to help the refugee situation, at what point can it no longer deal with that? That's been an ongoing question. The answer has been for a long time, more than we might have expected, but at some point that will no longer continue to be true.
Continuing to address the refugee crisis and safeguard Jordan's borders will remain important to keep King Abdullah in a coalition against the Islamic State extremists. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the State Department.
Well, President Obama plans to address the American people Wednesday on his strategy to deal with Islamic State. For a preview of what we can expect to hear from Mr. Obama and insight into the Islamic State, we are joined by VOA's Cal Perry. Cal, welcome to Africa 54. Now, what can we expect to hear from the president tomorrow night?
I think the president is going to want to clarify a number of things for the American people. We can already anticipate the speech's importance by the time that he's giving it. He'll be giving it at 9 p.m. here in the U.S., which is primetime viewing for people across the country. So we know that the speech is incredibly important for this White House. Up until now, this president has made it clear, unless there is a national security threat to the United States, he's going to be very hesitant to act overseas. I think he needs to make it clear to the American people, if ISIS, or ISIL as he will refer to it, if they are a national security threat, what is that threat and what is his plan to stop it?
So at this point, does it look like it's a national threat?
I think he has to make the argument that it is if he's going to take action anywhere on the ground in the Middle East. We heard a lot there in Scott Stearns' package about regional neighbors. I think we'll hear a lot about that as well. I think Barack Obama, and we've seen clues in this from the White House, and we saw this yesterday in the press briefing, where they said, why Syrians? It's their country.
Okay, now, it looks like the president might be in a good place as the Congress returns to work, because two lawmakers have already presented or introduced separate bills which authorize the use of force. Is the president inclined to kind of go with that?
You know, for a president who started his political career as a member of Congress is interesting, because this president has come across this question almost more than any other president. When does he need to go and get congressional support? He has said he will consult with Congress. He has said he wants Congress to debate what is going on in the Middle East and the U.S. role in that region. He has not said implicitly that he will allow Congress to vote or he will give them a real say in the process.
Now, going back to the beginning, and you've been in the region, when did these guys actually become such a major threat? We know that in the initial days of the fight against, or the war against Syrian President Assad, there were concerns that if you help the rebels, you might actually be helping terrorists.
That's right. And if you back Assad, are you backing somehow someone that is worse? And this is a question that I think is confounding this president. I think one of the things that's happening also in this country, and it's happening to this White House, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. Who is ISIS? Who is comprising these groups? We know it's comprised of some Americans, some people from the UK, from Europe, from Asia. We don't know, and I think that that's a real question. Who is this group? Who are they comprised of? And then how does this president try to sell to the world that this is an issue that everyone really needs to take a moment?
And initially the threat looked like it was just facing Syria and Iraq, but it looks like it's no longer confined to those two countries.
We have a new map of the Middle East, and we saw that in Scott's package, right? Yes. We have almost 1/5 of people living in Jordan are now refugees. Yes. So the borders have been redrawn. There now really is no border between Iraq and Syria. That border's gone. There's nobody there to protect it. That's a real problem, and it's a bad legacy of the U.S.'s time in Iraq, and I think we're also going to see that reflected in tomorrow night's speech.
And in terms of, the other group, Al-Qaeda, does this kind of take the focus away from Al-Qaeda?
I think that the U.S. president is going to try to ensure that the focus remains on U.S. national security based on any group. But I think you're right. I think because of social media, because we are seeing these videos and everything that ISIS is putting out at the same time that the U.S. president is, I think the focus is now there.
Very quickly, do you think this is going to make the U.S. work with some countries that in the last few months they wouldn't even be sitting around the same table?
I think that's very likely, and I think we're seeing that reflected in the U.S. negotiations with Iran. I think we'll see more of that in the UN General Assembly. Certainly that has to be discussed when the U.S. and Iran look at the Iranian nuclear program. They cannot ignore what's going on next door.
We definitely will be paying attention to the President's address tomorrow night. Carl, thanks a lot for excellent analysis. Well, Carl Perry of the Voice of America joining us today on Africa 54.